Why is Sherman probably today the most controversial figure of the Civil War?
I think he's the most controversial figure in the Civil War because of the destructive marches. Southerners deeply resent what he had done. But what Sherman thought he was doing and what his soldiers believed he was doing is bringing the war to a closure much more rapidly and thereby saving lives.
A lot of what people talk about with Sherman is psychological. How much of effect, I mean, there are those that say that Sherman was instrumental in ending the war, and as soon as they ended, how much of an effect do you think Sherman had on the war, both militarily and psychologically?
He had an enormous impact on the outcome of the war and its closure. You can't really separate Sherman's march from Lincoln's re-election because they happened almost simultaneously. But the truth of the matter is Sherman's march really jolted the Southern people because they realized that they couldn't protect their population. The reason you have an army is to protect your people and their property. And what Sherman demonstrated was that the whole notion of a Confederate army was flawed because they couldn't protect their people. So Sherman marched his army right through the Confederacy, and it demonstrated the weaknesses of the Confederacy to the civilian population. And keep in mind that you don't need to have your property destroyed to be cowed by Sherman's army. All you have to do is know that they can turn around and come back and do that to you. So when you're dealing with the United States, remember the Constitution protects two elements, people and property. And what Sherman's army is doing, of course, is destroying that one component.
It brings up another question. With the election, do you have an opinion? Do you think could Lincoln's election had gone differently had Sherman not been able to do what he did?
Well, Sherman won the Atlanta campaign, which pretty much assured Lincoln's election victory in 1864. So the election wouldn't have had, or the march to Savannah and through the Carolinas wouldn't have had much of an impact on.
I guess even before the actual march, then going into Georgia, taking Atlanta, and that huge successful campaign of taking Atlanta. Do you think if he'd been repulsed by Johnson's army and didn't take Atlanta, would that have affected Lincoln's re-election?
It could have. Sheridan fortunately won in the Shenandoah Valley at Cedar Creek, at Winchester and Cedar Creek. So that probably would have ensured Lincoln's re-election, but unquestionably the fall of Atlanta did, because the Union Army in 1864 had two principal targets. They were going after the Confederate armies, but they were advancing in the directions of Atlanta and Richmond. And of course, Richmond was locked in siege, and Grant had not made that much progress in that arena, so eyes focused on Sherman. So Sherman's victory in Atlanta was really important.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about Sherman the man?
Sherman is really smart. He should have graduated third in his West Point class, but he had so many demerits that he ended up graduating sixth. And he's a creative thinker. And one of the problems with West Point education is it tends to hammer out any creativity in the thought processes of individuals who go there. And that's a real problem in wartime. So Sherman's an unusual thinker. He's really well read, and he's got an incredible memory. So Sherman had traveled pretty widely in Georgia and South Carolina. When he went on the march, he remembered the terrain, he remembered the way things were. He also knew a lot about strategy, about operations, about tactics, and fundamental things about being an Army officer. So he could teach his soldiers about things as he was going on. He was also not very much into rank as royalty, and he conveyed that message to his soldiers. So the soldiers really admired him. They called him Uncle Billy. When you use an expression like Uncle Billy, it's a term of endearment, it's a term of affection, but it's also a term that you have quite a bit of respect for the guy.